Okay, so let's have a look at solving a Stack Overflow question, or rather, let's take a stab at it and see how far we get and see if we can help somebody out. So what I'm reading here is trying to read a directory created by Node.js after executing of a function. I created a Node application which does what it does is that it scrapes Google and downloads the top 15 images and then stores it in an HDD in a folder, blah 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 blah, query received after compressing. No problem that I am facing is when I'm going back to read a folder using read direct sync and storing the results in error. It returns an empty array. What is wrong with the code? So here we have the code. So if we take a look at this in our text editor, this is the code. We start by looking at our linter and it tells us that there is an error, so that's expected and that's expected, and then we use our auto formatter to get everything nice and clean. Okay, so let's go through it line by line. Let's start off with that the request function that we have declared here is it's not declared to begin with. There should be an import here, something like request. I don't know what, because if we're since this is all the code that we have to go on, we don't actually know where this is coming from. But let's say for the sake of argument that this is a global function, we ignore that. So it's going to take a URL, a function that takes an error, a response, and a body, which leads me to believe that this is probably not the fetch API, because I'm fairly sure that's just error and response. I don't really remember. I would have to check the documentation for that. So if there's no error, what happens if there is an error? It console logs encounter an error. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Though I would probably have put this higher up, then we wouldn't have to have this big structure here, but that's how it's written. And then I see a reference to Cheerio. Okay, so Cheerio is it's an HTML traversing library, which allows you to, in essence, do something very close to jQuery. So if you have an HTML string, for example, you can query and find elements and do that sort of stuff. And if I'm looking at this stuff here, I can see that, okay, so he wants to get everything that's under this ID, that is a shot, and everything inside of a TD with a link and an image. That's what he's after. So the image nodes is going to be in the comment here. Says image nodes is merely an array-like object, which is correct, because what's going to happen is that Cheerio is going to go through the list and return a wrapper that contains all of the results from this query. This is purposely old school, yes, because newer stuff doesn't work. Don't know why that is, but alright. The idea here is to declare an array of URLs, run through and get the 15 times, take image nodes and create an image node, urls.push image node attribute source. This looks a little bit weird here, but okay. So what's happening here is that he's grabbing the source off of each image, putting that on the URLs, and then he has an out comment log for URLs. Alright. And here we have a process compress function. It's no, it's actually not even a function. It is a promise with a single input function, which is a resolve, which this is all wrong. I don't think I've ever seen anyone write code or write a promise this way. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't recognize this at all. And then we do a file system access. That's not in the import either, which means that this should read something like that, because we need this, and we do require Cheerio as well. cheerio, which is down here. So there's several things missing. This report, like, to you, to who, like, if you guys are watching this, like, this is really bad form for someone asking a question on Stack Overflow. There is so much like, I mean, this code wouldn't even run if I tried to run it. It will never run. And if you're leaving out this much, you're not being a very nice internet citizen, I have to admit. This is, yeah, it's getting to the point where I'm starting to think that there's not much value in trying to fix what, like, the core. I'm thinking that, you know, we're gonna rewrite this completely. We're going to try and figure out what the, like, what the desired result is, and then we will try to write this code in a way that makes sense, at least to me, and hopefully the person who asked this question. Anywho, we'll look into that in just a bit. So here we see another thing that's a little bit weird. So the resolve function is actually outside of this callback function for make a director, which means that this is going to, this promise, when this promise is, it's actually not going to work at all. So I'm thinking that, yeah, and then there's get files, which has the exact same. I think that the issue here is that the person who asked this question, the bug that he was describing, is that he's just not aware of how promises work, and I think that's the core issue here, really. So I'm thinking that instead of me trying to fix this in place, I will write some code, and then I will just walk you guys through how. I'll just see if I can clean this up a little bit, and then I'll walk you through the code I've written, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I'll have a look. So I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so I made a little bit of an attempt to clean this code up from the original. As I said, like, there's too many things that are going on here. I don't really like the structure, and there is a few, like, internal functions declared here. So I thought, hey, let's see if I can make this a nicer development experience for everybody involved. And I realized that there were a few things that I was lacking in order to fully test if I could make this entire thing work. And one of those things is that we actually have a TinyFi integration here, which requires me to have an API key. So I got this working down to that I can get all the URLs, and I can, like, do the basically, after getting the URLs, I'm pretty stuck, because after that I need the API key to do the actual processing. But I'm fairly confident that it will work based on what I'm seeing here, because there is a few, like, references to, like, stuff like GIMP and this stuff here. I didn't actually keep that in because this is basically more specific stuff that I don't really see why we should care about now. I just want us to get to a point where the problem that he has described, which is in his sense, that his problem is that he's downloaded he's downloading the files, and he's supposed to have a directory, but there are no files in that directory. And I think that part has been solved now. So let's see if this makes any sense to anybody. So the first thing I did was that I created a top level function called getImages, and it takes a single URL to keep things simple. For our test case, we're going to use YouTube for that. So as you can see, we declare all our stuff here, and then we actually at the end of this script call this function that we made. Now the first thing I'm doing here is that I use fetch. I use node fetch because I think that it's a nice library, and it is the browser standard for like the new browser standard instead of XML HTTP requests. And I think, you know, standards are nice. So this is the flow that I imagined. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the response to text. So when we call fetch, the first thing it's going to give us is a response object, and pass that to us, and that response object is going to have a text function. It also has like JSON and a few others, but text is what we want because we're scraping an HTML page, which means that when we're going to youtube.com and getting that, we're getting HTML, and we want to convert that to text so that we can then use Cheerio. This is where the actual part Cheerio comes into play. So after we call response to text, we're going to get a body, and this is the HTML text string. We give that to Cheerio.load, and that's going to instantiate Cheerio for us. And then we say that, he was saying that he was very specific, so I could probably use this syntax, like this selector here, for that specific. But he's using a very specific page, I assume, because this ID is probably not on YouTube. And since he didn't really say which page he's visiting, I thought, yeah, let's just try it out. Just make it images, like any image. So we use Cheerio to traverse our body text or the HTML text, and we're going to get back all the image nodes in a wrapper. So what we do then is we pass the results of this function here down to image nodes to URLs, which is where this is happening, as we can recognize from the very start of his code here. It's very similar. So you declare a results array, you loop through up the first 15 results that you have, you put those in the results by getting the source, and then you return the results. That's it. So now we have all the URLs, the 15 URLs we want, and what we then want to do is that we want to make the photo directory. And this is where I think that he went a little bit wrong. So first thing we do is we take the directory name for simplicity's sake, and we call that photos with the directory name. Here it is. So we're checking if asynchronously now, because I don't really see what the benefit of making this an async thing would be. Maybe if it's on a web server or something, but since it's just a standalone script and we don't have any more information, I made it a synchronous thing. You can do this with promises as well, of course. So exist syncs checks that a directory, if it does exist. So if it doesn't exist, then we do a synchronous creation of said directory. And if we look at my project here, we can see that it actually worked. This directory has now been created. And this is a synchronous operation, which means that this issue that he had here, where he did this is an async operation, and then he has a callback function with an error. And the problem he has here is that this function here, this resolve function, I mean, there's more stuff that's wrong here, but that should go over here, because since it's the resolve of this problem is actually outside of the asynchronous call, this is going to return immediately. It's going to resolve immediately. So this is out of sync with the rest of the code, which is probably where the issue he's having is coming from to begin with. So what do we do? Yeah, then we get the URLs and we just pass them through, because we don't want to mutate them in any way. We just want to pipe them through to the next step in our flow here. So what have we done? We made the response into text, we changed the body to image nodes, we got the URLs, we created our directory, and now we want to download the files. So yeah, I just put a little comment here because I don't want to go through the hassle of setting up a Teenify account. So I'm thinking that I'll just log out the results of running this script here to make sure that we have the URLs, because the rest of this becomes fairly specific to what he wants to create, and only he really knows what he's after, because he doesn't I can guess from this. I've never used GIMP, but it looks to me that he's mutating the image, so image grayscale, write file name. Yeah, he's changing the grayscale on an image and he's writing it to a file name of some sort. So my guess is that he's grabbing all these images, doing some type of mutation on the image, and creating a new image with this GIMP library. So next up is, so what we're doing now is that we have all these URLs. So we do .map URL teenify.from URL. I actually went and checked the the documentation. So from URL is going to return a promise, or rather I assume that it returns a promise, because if I'm calling from URL, that to me communicates that this is going to be a external call, like it's going to visit that URL and grab the image. So that's probably a promise. And then we do promise.all for promises, and the reason why we do this is because now we have an array of promises and we want to wait until all of the promises are resolved, so that because what's going to happen is that you're going to fire off 15 requests, which is going to be pretty memory heavy, but you know, this is just like sandbox level right now. So it's going to be pretty heavy. It's going to fire off 15 different requests, and then we put them in an array, and then we simply wait until all of those requests are back, so we have all these images in memory. This is very dangerous if you don't know what type of images you're getting, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, that's not the main concern right now. Alright, so we downloaded our images. Now we have an array of images, or image data. And now we want to process that image data, which is this array over here. So we loop through all the images, and there's some data and the index. And this I am assuming that this is what's happening over here. Let's see here. Yeah, tinify from URL. So it creates a source, and then it does source.toFile. Path.join, directory name, photo query optimized. The query and optimized, yeah, he's basically creating a path to this image, which is fairly similar to what I'm doing over here. So I'm grabbing the image data, mapping over it. Here's the data itself, which is this source thing over here in essence. And yeah, and then I create a path to the directory name, photos, and then I'm calling that, like, I don't know why the query is so important, but all I did was to create a optimize underscore with like the name of that image. And what's gonna happen after that is that you're going to see that there's this called data to file URL, which is the same thing here, what he's doing. I don't really know why he does this well, like, I think this reads a little bit clean, but yes, you can see it's the same call. So he calls to file on this like this exact URL to the photo directory, and I do the same thing. But yeah, this is how I'd like to write it. It's virtually the same thing. Now let's see here. Process image data, image manipulation is the last part, and this is the part, like, I completely skipped this part because the way that he has written this is very it's contextually dependent. So he uses GIMP, and like, I can go into that more closely, but I thought, since I don't actually have the tinify API key and I don't get any image, I don't really see why I should go through this here, and it's pretty straightforward. So that's where I left it. So if I now run this code, let's see here. Node index.js, running that. Bam. So what we see from the output here is that I'm doing a log over here of the URLs, and as we can see, that's what we expected. We got all the page URLs, and then it logs out, and we've encountered an error, provide an API key with tinify key. Yeah, which is what we expected, because we don't have a tinify key for this. We can't proceed in our logic and validate that all of this works. But I'm like, even if this isn't 100% correct, I'm pretty sure that it's fairly on the level with what he's trying to do here. So I'm sorry, guys, like, this when I answer a question like this and I tape it, I don't actually prepare ahead of time. So sometimes I can solve the entire problem, and sometimes I stop at, I can do some of it and see if I can make it easier for the person who's trying to solve the problem to kind of help out. But if I can't solve it, at least I'm very forward with saying that, alright, this is how I think about the problem. It's not the entire solution, but maybe it will help you to understand where you're going wrong. And I think that the way that I have written this will communicate that the issue here is really that there is a misunderstanding of how to use these promises and how he's using make directory instead of like he's basically mixing asynchronous operations and promises, but he's not putting the resolves and he's not formatting the promises in a correct way. That's what I'm thinking anyway. So yeah, that's. I also noticed one issue that may occur here, and that is that we see here that there's an absolute URL over here to a resource, which is this. Let's see, it's a JPEG file actually, but these here are relative to the page that he's visiting. So I see that if I wanted this to work, which this is probably going to break this call over here from URL, I would have to probably append or like prepend this URL here, check that if it's an absolute URL or not, and if it's an absolute URL, just call it. Otherwise, I would have to prepend due to like this part here. But yeah, I'm not gonna do that. Hopefully, this is going to be useful to him. I'm gonna post this code on as a response, and just say that I couldn't get it like all the way through to like exactly do what you wanted to do, but this is how I'm thinking about this problem, so hopefully it's going to be useful. Okay guys, that's pretty much it. Hope it made some sense for you, and yeah, once again, sorry I couldn't fix this one 100%.